What's up, folks? This is once again Dr. Remy LeBeau, and I'm here in the X-Lair to again try to provide you with some sort of a cure to your everlasting disease, the X-Men statue withdrawal syndrome. But actually, it appears that the X-Men statue withdrawal syndrome has morphed, has mutated into a more dangerous strain that causes all sorts of addiction to anything related to the world of sci-fi, superheroes, science fiction, things that generally are, you know, what the nerd community within the pop cultural dimension of life tend to gravitate to. So this is the beginning of a new era for the channel, so I hope you all will enjoy this new direction. But I mean, it doesn't negate old directions. There will always be more statues to review. There will always be a variety of things to talk about related to the X-Men. But I grew up, you know, reading Marvel. I read Spider-Man quite a bit, almost as much as the X-Men. And I read some of the Avengers. Occasionally I picked up a DC book, but I mean, it was mainly X-Men and Spider-Man. So thus I'm a big Spidey fan. So I thought it would be fitting for me to then have my first sort of film review of a comic book movie that, you know, that deserves, you know, a review, basically. To be The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Hey, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 just came out today. Today is actually May 1st. I went to the 7 p.m. Pacific time screening of the film. The film has been out a couple of weeks in Europe already. I think maybe Australia too, and maybe a few other countries. I know not China, but there have been a variety of international markets that got the film before the US. And so, you know, it's sort of a weird situation for myself and other fans in the US because, you know, it's like we want to watch these films, and of course we're like connected to everybody via the internet, and so you want to talk to people over the internet about common interests, but you also don't want to have them spoil a film for you, you know, or like any kind of thing that's being released, that is released at different times in different areas, and you know, has some sort of a story to it or elements that are best left to the actual experience, whatever it may be. May it be filming, may it be reading a comic book, whatever. You know, there's certain elements of a story that should not be spoiled, because then that basically spoils the whatever it is one's watching. Like, you know, in this case, it's a film. So I have been actually staying away from the usual places I go online to sort of find out information about movies and whatnot, because I didn't want this film spoiled for me. So somehow I managed to have the film not be spoiled for me, which is fantastic. And so I was able to get like a fresh perspective on the entire thing as I was watching it, react to it naturally, not sort of just waiting for something that I knew was going to happen, more of just kind of going, you know, letting the experience take me where it did take me. And, you know, and it actually wound up being very effective, like, because I was able to stay away from everything. Like, the one thing in this movie that really kind of makes it a good movie was not spoiled for me. And so when the moment happened, it really affected me emotionally, just intellectually, just viscerally. And, you know, I really felt it in my being. I really could identify, and I had empathy for what was happening. It was like a real, genuine reaction. It was like, you know, one of those great theater-going moments where you are completely connected to what's happening and just are taken on a roller coaster ride of like excitement and sadness, and just, you know, the full spectrum of emotions. So I'm glad that happened. Now, that takes me to a important disclaimer that I'd like to make really quick before I actually move on to talk about the film, and that is that I am going to have spoilers in this. So if you don't want the film to be spoiled, Stop watching this video now. You can watch it. You can watch it when you get back from watching it, and then you can chime in on the comments, and we can have a conversation about the various things that occur in the film. But I don't want to spoil this for you, so like I put in the title, spoilers. Like I put in the description, spoilers. I am going to have spoilers in this review, so you are warned, my friends. You have been warned. Okay. So The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I liked it. It was better than the original. I liked the original film. I didn't dislike it, but like I like most fans that, you know, I'm in my 30s, most fans that sort of experience like the full Sam Raimi trilogy run of the original Spider-Man films. You know, when we found out that the fourth one was not going to happen and that they were going to reboot the series, it was kind of like a big letdown. Like you know, they had already cast John Malkovich as the Vulture. I mean, there was a lot that, you know, was already in the works. And like for me, you know, I didn't hate the third one as much as like most people seem to have hated it. But I did feel it was a little unbalanced. I felt that Sandman couldn't have been in it, and they should have just focused on the black costume and Venom. For me, that would have been fine, and it really would have, I think, been an effective film. But I know that it's not Sam Raimi's fault. I heard that Avi Arad, like the big, you know, executive at Marvel, who has his hands in every Marvel property, in every manifestation of those properties. I know that I'm pretty sure Venom was forced on Raimi, and Raimi had just planned to do Sandman. And anyway, so the film, you know, whatever. I enjoyed parts of it, and I did enjoy it enough to want to watch more Sam Raimi Spider-Man. You know, like that's just I was very much okay with that. I was very much okay with that happening. And then all of a sudden, the fourth one was not happening, and John Malkovich was not going to be the Vulture, which I was actually very excited for because John Malkovich is a great actor, and he would have made a great villain for Spidey. And you know, so you know, after that whole experience, like it was kind of, it was like bittersweet when The Amazing Spider-Man came out, and I was hesitant. Like I think I was a little bit reserved in my willingness to really enjoy the film because, you know, the film, you know, it itself was responsible in part for taking something else away from me that I wanted and expected. Anyway, I like the first film. I like Andrew Garfield. I think he's a great Spider-Man. He's got great personality. He's got charisma. He's funny. He's able to exhibit the full range of emotions that are necessary for this character in order to sort of like buy that this character can exist, and B, sort of, you know, also have it, you know, kind of resonate well with what it's supposed to be based on the comics, you know, based on how he was portrayed in the comic books. And so Andrew Garfield is an excellent Spider-Man. Emma Watson, I think her name is. She's a great Gwen Stacy as well. I really buy their romance. I really and was engaged in their romance. And you know, the death of her father was rough, and then the whole, you know, him, you know, wanting to keep the promise to stay away from Gwen and then deciding not to. It's like I bought it. The things I really didn't like about it much were the lizard. I didn't like the lizard that much. I thought it was a little over the top, and maybe that was about it. I mean, maybe the whole, like, I don't know. I kind of understand that they were trying to build a bigger story that could expand beyond, like, you know, one or two or even three films. But I did feel that it was a little bit overloaded with some things. But overall, I liked the film. I pretty much expected the same from this one, and it sort of did have the same effect, except for the one very important thing that happened in the film, which I'm going to spoil right now. I mean, hopefully you have heard my warning and are not about to be spoiled, because I would be very unhappy if that was the case. But the one thing that really changed the overall effect of this film for me was the death of Gwen Stacy. Gwen Stacy died, and it's like I kind of expected it, but not really. And then when it actually happened, it was just a little bit shocking. You know, it was like it really shocked me because I didn't want to allow myself to feel the loss, you know, as like the moments were occurring where it was like unclear, is she going to die? Is she not going to die? Like, I didn't want to experience the loss unless it actually happened. And then it happened in a very clever way where it was unclear for a few moments whether or not she had survived. And I'll go into that, but they did a really good job with that. And because of that moment, that movie, that elevated the movie above the first one for me. It made it actually a really good movie, and I'm excited to see where they're going to go from here. And I really like the way they dealt with it too. So anyway, so that's my overall impression of it. And I had to mention the key scene because it was like a turning point for me. It really did change my mind about, you know, my overall feelings about the film. Okay, so that's my overall feeling. Now let's go into some of the specifics. Of course, the acting pretty much across the board was superb. Jamie Foxx was good as Electro, but I'm going to talk about Electro in a second. But I didn't really love the Electro stuff. Like I thought it wasn't handled that well. I thought it could have been handled a little better, and so because of that, I think it kind of reflected badly on Jamie Foxx himself. But it wasn't his fault. It was just it was written poorly. Like the whole evolution of the character and like and sort of the scenes he was in and sort of his turns. I didn't buy them so much, and they were a little bit over the top. But he was fine. Obviously, Emma Watson, Andrew Garfield, fine. Sally Field, fantastic. And then the kid, I don't know the kid's name. The kid that played Harry Osborn, he was in Chronicle. He did a really good job in that movie. He was like the kid that became like a villain at the end. I thought that was handled really well, and I thought he did a great job in that. And that's why I was really happy to find out he was going to be in this. And then he was Harry Osborn. Here's another spoiler: he becomes the Goblin. Like, they never actually call him the Goblin, but he does become the Goblin in this film. So that was interesting, that the fact that that happened, and I'll talk about that as well. But the kid did a great job acting his way through this part. And again, the overall execution of it, even though I liked it more than the Electro stuff, it was sort of a little bit badly handled as well. And I'll go into that in a second. So acting overall good, you know, and like that's what you would expect. The directing was fine. There are, like, I think some of the key problems with the film are with the directing. I don't think Mark Webb. I think Mark Webb is a talented director. He can put a film together and he does a good job, but he's not a great director. He's not a Joss Whedon. He's not a Christopher Nolan. He's not a Bryan Singer. Like, you know, there's like certain ways to handle certain events in a film, like, and the way you handle those events is really related to the pacing of the film, like, and how you pace each sequence, you know, given what's happening within the sequence. And there were a few things that were kind of off. So, and I think this is sort of in large part what led to like the Electro stuff not being that great and the Green Goblin not being that great also. The opening sequence where Spidey is like trying to stop the guy that becomes the Rhino, who's like stealing some plutonium from Oscorp. That was well done, very well done. But there were a couple of shots in there that were a little odd. I remember there was like one shot, I think, from the angle, like a truck is about to hit another vehicle or something, and it was like from the angle of like the tire or something, like you're seeing above a tire, and it looked kind of cheap, and it just seemed kind of weird. It's like it's the sort of thing that like Bryan Singer would have gone back and reshot, or it might be the fault of the editor. The editor just chose the wrong shot to put in there. But anyway, it was weird. So I remember, so the Electro stuff. So Electro's dead, and then I guess the corporate guys that are trying to cover it up and trying to take Oscorp from Harry, they're like having a conversation about how they need to cover up the fact that Max, Jamie Foxx's character was named Max something. I know that's like the name of the character in the comics, but I actually never learned that. So sorry, other fanboys, forgive me for that. Anyway, so they talk about how they're going to cover up, and then they cut to like the morgue, and like Jamie Foxx is like covered by a morgue sheet or whatever, and then all of a sudden he starts like reanimate, like the electricity starts going off. It happens too fast. Like there wasn't enough of like a sort of introducing us into this environment, into the scene, and kind of like creating this like calm sort of feeling where you kind of expect him to be dead, even though obviously we've seen the trailers and we know that he's not dead. But it's like you kind of want to play it up in a different way. I mean, not everybody's going to be watching all the trailers, and there's going to be people 40 years from now that watch this film and they're not going to know about Electro and how Electro was dealt with. So maybe they'll just think that Jamie Foxx died, and you kind of want to introduce a scene in a way that kind of misleads you, initially, and then kind of takes you in the direction that kind of surprises you. And I noticed in that scene, it was just too fast. It was like, shot of the body, and then all of a sudden the electricity goes off, and he like just comes back to life. I don't know. Anyway, that's just an example of how the pacing was wrong in certain scenes. But that's my critique of the directing. I think Mark Webb does a great job of like directing action and kind of like intimate character moments as well. Those are well done. I mean, like I said, the guy knows how to put a film together, but he can't put it together perfectly. Unlike other directors, like Joss Whedon, I don't think had any bad shots in the Avengers, and in fact, a lot of shots that were just kind of throwaways were done in an artistic way that were interesting. I remember the opening scene with Romanoff, Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow, where she's like in that chair and they're interrogating her, but it turns out she's actually interrogating them, which I thought was really cool. There's like a shot from like a dirty mirror, like looking through a dirty mirror. It was just a random shot, but it was like, it's like Joss Whedon took a moment to like have something interesting in there that didn't need to be in there. And obviously it was like well-planned sequence through and through. And he is a meticulous perfectionist when it comes to his filmmaking. And so, no shots are out of place. But with Mark Webb, some shots are out of place, and some shots are kind of like silly. So the big sequence where Spider-Man at the end, towards the end, is fighting Electro, and like they're fighting through the electric power plant. And even right before that, where like Electro's like going crazy, like kind of just like shooting like electric bolts all over the place. I guess that's more of the storytelling, but it was just it was just all too chaotic, and it just, there wasn't like a steady, seamless like flow to it. It was just kind of like jarring at times. That wasn't the case in the Avengers. Like in the whole final sequence in New York, like everything was smooth, and like you went from one thing to the next, and it was like crazy stuff was happening, but like you were always kind of grounded, and you were just kind of like taken through this adventure in a visual way that was beautiful. And that's an example of good filmmaking. Mark Webb is not a filmmaker like that, but I do want to say I'm just pointing out some of the bad stuff and why he, in characterizing him, is not like the perfect director, but overall he does a great job. I have to admit, he does a great job, but he doesn't make great films, and that might be the missing piece of the puzzle in terms of making these better films. Like Sam Raimi is a great filmmaker through and through, and so Spider-Man 3's story problems notwithstanding, the three films are great. Like he's a great director. Anyway, so Mark Webb is a little lacking in directing, and that kind of affected the experience, making it not the best film. A good film, but not the best film. So the story. So I don't know. It felt a little too episodic. Like there wasn't enough of a cause and effect sort of chain where like things were building. It felt more like a series of moments that were kind of tied together, but not enough so that I was just kind of like engaged the entire time. And that might be because they're trying to build like a bigger universe, and they're trying to kind of establish a lot of story elements that are kind of branch out into other films, and that, you know, that's all fine and good. I mean, they have every right to do that, and I support that. But yeah, it could have been done slightly better. The whole stuff at the beginning with the parents and the airplane. I mean, it was like a big sequence, and it did play a big role. But I feel like maybe it played too big of a role, and it maybe could have played a smaller role, or they could have just taken the Electro stuff out, just focused on that, and kind of have that aspect of the story kind of be a strong backbone for making Harry into the Green Goblin, and just leave all the Electro stuff out. But I mean, whatever, the Electro stuff's in there. Like I'm saying, overall the film worked, but there were a lot of strong elements in it that kind of made it off balance, and I think is what maybe led to it being somewhat episodic. I'm sure they realized this, because I heard that they were shooting a lot of scenes of Mary Jane in it, and that again is like another thing where like they were trying to sort of, you know, establish this other branch that was maybe just out of place at the time, or just maybe superfluous. Like it was too much for the film, and like I get that, and I obviously I get it after having seen it, and I get why they would make that decision to take it out, and I'm glad they did. And they you know, like I'm saying, they should have we didn't need the whole Electro thing, I don't think, or Electro should have been just more poetic. He was like saying a lot of things that were just kind of like you know, prototypical like villain things that didn't really make too much sense to me. Like, I don't know, it was weird. Like he was just like this worker at the Oscorp that was kind of invisible, and he was kind of invisible in his whole life, and then he was really appreciative when Spider-Man saved him, but then when he turned into Electro, like he immediately like starts to hate Spider-Man within like minutes, which I didn't really buy. I know he's going a little crazy, but I don't really buy like the intense way that he just kind of his like switch flips, and all of a sudden he hates Spider-Man, and Spider-Man's his villain. Like it didn't make 100% sense to me, and there just wasn't enough. Like this was one of the problems. There was like a quirky setup for the character of Electro, and it had kind of like a Jim Carrey, the Riddler feel from Batman Forever, the Joel Schumacher beginning of the end of the, you know, 80s 90s Batman franchise, which was kind of silly. Like the way they set up the Riddler was like very 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 silly, like too silly, and I kind of got that feeling here with Electro. Like the way they were setting him up, like really off and quirky, and like he had like his weird apartment that was kind of like the Riddler's original like apartment. I don't know. It was whatever. And then when he first comes out as Electro, like you have this like really cool looking, like, you know, power charged, like transparent man, and they had like this really goofy music playing in the background, and I was just it was wrong. It was the wrong thing. It was the wrong thing to do at that moment. Like, you don't want to have some goofy music. Like, you want to have some ominous, you know, like threatening music, or something like really cool. You know, something that like really captures like the intensity of this character, and also kind of establishes that he's like awesome. He's the kind of character that's like, that you like to hate, you really admire, you know. So I think that was the wrong choice. And then they had a really cool thing where like I'm saying, like the movie's not bad, and it was, all these things were not complete failures. And the reason why I say take Electro completely out is because I felt the movie was unbalanced. But like when he is broken out of the prison by Harry Osborn, and he like turns into electricity, that actually started looking really cool. And at that moment, I actually started to like really get into this Electro character. Like he visually started to look really cool and like really menacing. And I thought, okay, so go for like the naked, almost naked, kind of like he had like a Dr. Manhattan feel from Watchmen, where like Dr. Manhattan, when he first appeared after he had that accident during that whatever experiment they were doing, and that turned him into Dr. Manhattan. He first appeared as like a nervous system, and then he like generated the entire body. Like it had kind of that feeling to it, and it was really cool. Like it was really great. But then they put like this black suit on him, and he looked kind of stupid. And I was like, where'd they get the black suit from? Like. Because Harry Osborn hadn't gone into the special projects at that point. Like he was using Electro to get to the special projects. Anyway, so that was the only element of Electro that I kind of liked. And then beyond that, he was just kind of like crazed and like doing like all sorts of crazy power things that like were just there for spectacle, which is fine, but like you want to have a little bit of substance behind that kind of stuff. You don't just want it to be happening just because you expect it or need it to happen. You kind of want it to have a little bit more connection to the story. That's just my opinion. It just seemed kind of weird. Like he was taking back his electric grid, but I don't know. I'm not going to get into that stuff, but I've said my piece with Electro. Jamie Foxx did a fine job. There were hints of the character being kind of cool, but overall, I was kind of disappointed with the Electro character, and that was a major part of the story, and that really threw the story off. I did like the Peter and Gwen stuff, like all throughout the movie. I liked it a lot. I wish there was more of it, and I kind of felt it was a little too fast how they broke up at the beginning, given what had happened in the end of the last movie. I kind of feel like you needed they say. I mean, I'm gonna assume it was maybe 6 months after the first film, the beginning of this film, or something along those lines. Maybe within a year, and apparently like they had broken up a few times, and then this time, Gwen was like, "You've broken up with me a lot. I'm gonna break up with you," and this kind of happened toward the beginning of the film. I mean, given what happened last time, given what happened at the end of the last film, like Peter gets over like his promise to the father. And having like already kind of wrestled through that issue and getting to the conclusion that I'm not gonna hold up my end of the promise, and I am gonna have Gwen in my life. It just didn't feel right for them all of a sudden at the beginning of this film to break up, and then for them not really to be together throughout the film, and then the whole thing of her maybe leaving and going to London, given that she is going to wind up dying at the end. I just kind of felt like maybe you should ground her a little more in Peter's life so that maybe it has a little bit more sort of weight when she dies. Like, she is a strong part of his life. He defied the promise to Gwen's father, and included her in his life, and they have formed a strong connection, and it is strong, it endures, it is beautiful, it is ideal. It is something that nobody wants to lose, and then it's lost, and then it really hits you hard. Instead, it was like they broke up, and then she was about to leave London, and then he took her from the cab. She was about to leave for London to go to Oxford. He takes her from the cab, and then they have their moment, and that leads to the Electro stuff, and that leads to the clock tower stuff. But there, who's to know that like maybe she just would have been like, well, I'm just gonna go to Oxford like the next day, like if she hadn't died. So if they had just kept a solid relationship throughout the entire film, I think it would have had a little bit more sort of of a punch when she finally dies. But it was heartbreaking no matter how you look at it. But it could have been more heartbreaking, is what I'm saying. And that again is part of like the Electro thing. Too much Electro. The Harry stuff. I love the Harry stuff. I think this is a great Harry Osborn. I didn't like how they killed Norman Osborn at the very beginning. I thought that was not a good idea. I think Norman Osborn is a very strong character, And you don't just want to get rid of a character like that without exploiting him. They killed him off too quickly in the original trilogy. They could have maintained him in this trilogy and really done something special with him. But instead they chose to kill him at the beginning. And then Harry sort of becomes a goblin. I don't know. That was kind of strange, but I really like the kid playing Harry, and I think he did a great job, and I really like all the Harry stuff, so I can forgive them for the Norman Osborn stuff, because it really gave the film an opportunity to exploit, you know, this character of Harry portrayed by this kid who's fantastic. So I really like that. I thought there should have been more Harry and Peter, you know, more of their friendship sort of. Because it was weird. It was kind of like Harry was never mentioned in the first film, and then it's explained why here, but all of a sudden they kind of were friends. I don't know. It was there wasn't a naturalness to the whole evolution of the relationship that they shared within the film that I think it could have had they had a few more scenes together and maybe a little bit more with Gwen. But these are small criticisms. I do like overall, I like I do like that at least a friendship was established, and that kind of led to the things that it led to. It was strange Harry becoming the Goblin. So he like takes the spider venom that was in the radioactive spiders that had bit Peter initially, and he just like starts falling apart physically, and he like crawls to the glider and this like suit of this like suit that's like, I guess, a military sort of suit that's supposed to protect soldiers in a really sort of effective way. That's probably like, you know, $1 billion. It's probably worth like $1 billion or something. And he like crawls to it, and then all of a sudden he's on the glider and he's wearing the thing, and it's like, it's weird. It's weird. It didn't feel natural. It's again part of the pacing, part of the way. Not in part, I think this is Mark Webb's fault. Like that could have been handled a little better. Like, you know, you got to get into this a little more. Like why does he know he can go to the glider? Like, you know, how does he get into the glider given that he's falling apart? Like how does he get into that suit? Like it's got to be a little bit better than that. Like you can't just like cheat things like that. At least for adult fans like myself, we're not gonna like that. Like we want things to make sense, like they did in like the Dark Knight, you know, and the Avengers, for me. But whatever, he became the Goblin. It was kind of like a weird Goblin. He was kind of like a mutated sort of person that kind of had like Goblin features. Whatever. I did like I was just, so again, we're talking spoilers here. Electro dies, and then all of a sudden Harry shows up. The minute Harry showed up, I was like, okay, because so when Electro died, I was like disappointed. I was like, okay, so this is kind of like the first film. The lizard dies and everything's as was expected, and the movie's going to end and blah, blah, blah. But then it didn't happen. The movie didn't end. And then all of a sudden Harry shows up, and then he realizes that Spider-Man is Peter Parker, and then Gwen's there, and he takes Gwen, and then you're immediately like, oh shit. Like, is this it? Is this like the death of Gwen Stacy? Like, you know, the thing that we've all been speculating might happen in this film. Holy shit cakes, you know? And then it gets crazy, you know? Just the feeling. I was reading some stuff online already tonight when I got home. And there was mention of the fact that why did the death have to happen in the clock tower? Why couldn't it have happened? I think it's the George Washington Bridge. I think that's the bridge in which she is killed in the comics. Like, why didn't they just do the death in the bridge? They chose to do it in a different place, in like a clock tower. Whatever, they did it, and the thing that I think was like the saving, like the thing that I mentioned at the beginning of the review, the thing that really kind of turned this movie into a good movie for me was the way they handled her death. Like, it's all very slow motion. She's falling, and it's like your classic like cliche, a character's falling. There's like a close up of her face. She's like, you know, in slow motion, things are falling behind her, and it's like that moment that you know the person is in peril, but you know that the person's going to be saved. And that's the way we were experiencing it. And, you know, and then Peter shoots his webbing, and it's like slowly, you know, heading to her. Like it actually has to go around some other like clock debris that's falling, and then it finally grabs her, and then it starts to stretch, and like you think, okay, so this is the moment where like it holds her and she barely escapes death, but she does escape death. And right when you think that it's going to be one of those moments that she escapes, like the webbing is stretched to its capacity, but to the point where like she actually does hit the ground. It does stop her momentum, but she hits the ground enough where all of a sudden she goes limp, and she's like hanging there limp. And then Peter goes down to her, and still like there's like a lot of these moments where like he's like, no, she's dead, she can't be dead. And then there's like close-ups of her face, and there's a lot of these where it's like, it's those moments where like, you know, characters like snaps out of death. You know, we see it all the time in all sorts of films. You know, these moments where like it just feels like, oh no, this character you love is dead, but that, you know, that you know, seconds before you actually are able to accept it, they come back to life. It didn't happen this time. Gwen Stacy did not come back to life. Like, this was the death of Gwen Stacy, and it was powerful, and it was the moment of the movie for me. And I'm so glad it wasn't spoiled by the online stuff, and I really do hope it doesn't spoil the moment for you, that you've already seen the film before you watch this review. But that moment turned me, and then they handled it so well. Like, there was a funeral, and then you see Peter at the grave, and like the seasons are changing, and like, and he's at the grave, and it's really powerful. It's like really powerful. It's like really sad. Like, my God, like Peter lost Gwen. Like, he broke the promise to the captain, and it led to exactly what the captain had warned him might happen. And Peter's devastated, and he's not Spider-Man for 5 months, and it's fantastic. And then you have another sequence where there's a few sequences. One is where like Harry Osborn is in prison, and he's like, you know, kind of not as intensely goblin as he was before, but he mentions that he goes back and forth with it, and that sort of and his exchange with some guy in a hat. I forgot what he called him, but I think it's the same guy that went to visit the Lizard at the end of the Amazing Spider-Man, like after credits sequence. They have their exchange, and then that kind of sets up the Sinister Six. And he says, and Harry's like, I want to form a team, and I want it to be small. And then they, you know, they cut to like the room where there's like all the various gadgets, this like special projects place where he found the glider. And then there's like the Rhino suit, and then they put the guy, Paul Giamatti, who was the Rhino at the beginning, they put him in the Rhino suit. And, you know, he's like wreaking havoc on New York. And then that's when Peter finally decides to become the Amazing Spider-Man again. He actually goes to fight the Rhino. And then the film ends in the middle of that battle, like as it's about to begin. And I thought that was fantastic. I thought that was a great way to end the film. I really liked it. So from the moment that Electro dies to the end, fantastic. Like some of the best stuff in the Spider-Man movies. And so that was enough to totally, you know, for at least for me, make the movie a good movie. A few other things. I think that's basically all I wanted to say. I could cover a few other things, but I'm not going to. I think, so on balance, the film is good. It's not a great film, but there are great moments in it. I look forward to the Sinister Six. I look forward to Spider-Man 3, Amazing Spider-Man 3. I look forward to a Venom film, whatever that's going to be. You know, as on a 10-point scale, I'd give the film like a 7.9. On an A through F scale, I'd give it like a B, minus. A B minus, I'd say. But, you know, it's totally worth watching. I recommend it. I do recommend it. I think, and also because it's part of a bigger story now that will be told. I think it's definitely worth watching, and there's a lot of cool stuff to see. It's definitely it's not a great film, but it's definitely worth going to the movies to see. So that's my 2 cents, folks. All right, well, thank you for checking out my video. This is, again, a different type of video for me, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'm going to do more stuff like this in the future. at different times. But thank you for checking it out. My name is Dr. Remy LeBeau, and as always, you better put an X in that box because ain't nobody checking me. Take care. Bye-bye.